The evening was sullen, and the dark forest trees cast shadows over the nature that the young girl paved her way through. The girl's name was Raven, and she was an avid hiker. She had ventured further and further into the forest tonight. Deeper and deeper she had ventured as the golden setting sun met the leaves, matching their autumnal colors. She had known these woods since childhood. However, today she had found something more to explore. As she made her way deeper into the forest, far deeper than she had ever dared to venture before, she had come across a lonely, abandoned cabin sitting by itself amidst the forest. Did she dare trespass? The cabin looked as though it had not been touched for at least 100 years. It was greatly disheveled, and the greying wood that had been bleached by the sun was splintering and morphing with the weight of all the past energy it must have once held. She stepped onto the porch, her boots caked with mud, and pushed onto the wooden, warped door gently. It creaked open awkwardly, and she stepped inside, the bare wooden floor moaning painfully underneath her, as if greeting her presence with eagerness into its lonely existence. Dust filled the barren room, and she ensured to tread carefully, for she felt that the aging floor could collapse beneath her at any moment, leaving a trail of soft mud behind her. She looked around, letting her eyes adjust to the dim room. There were cupboards, a small kitchen adjacent to her right, with a small worktop that separated the kitchen from the small sitting area that extended larger than the kitchen, just around the corner, so part of the room was hidden a little. In the sitting room was an old misshapen couch, which was engulfed in dirt and grime. Dead leaves surrounded the floor, and there was a small doorway hatch to the left of the room. She began nosily looking through the cupboards one by one, the old wooden doors almost falling off their rusty hinges. She noticed there had been bowls and dishware left behind, and the flimsy metal sink was a little dirty, which she decided it was best to stay away from. She began going through the cupboards that were closest to the floor now, one by one, opening the doors and closing them softly. The sun was beginning to set, and the old matted fabric, or what was left of it, of the folded curtains by the broken window swayed back and forth with great urgency in the breeze as darkness was beginning to fall. She looked through each cupboard one by one and found nothing of interest until she came to the last but one cupboard. It was a kitchen appliance many people use, in fact. It wasn't really much interest to her still. She handled it for a second, looking at the broken wires and the old navy blue handle of the metal tool. If only she had turned it the other way, she would have noticed the dried blood on the other end. But she couldn't, for she heard the creak of the door opening behind her and the muttering of a man's deep voice. So she was forced to put the tool back quickly in its rightful place so that it looked untouched. She didn't know what possessed her to do this. Maybe it was her deep-rooted premonition for survival. But before she could even turn to look behind her at whom had walked through the door to this abandoned cabin, far, far into the middle of nowhere, deep within the woods, she had crept quickly into the living room and snuck into the small hatch door in the wall to hide from the potential encounter. As she did so, the man stood muttering in the doorway, looking down at the floor and kicking the mud off of his boots before he entered. His gruff voice filled the dusty room. Raven couldn't see much through the crack in the doorway of his small cove of a hiding place, but she could hear the man plain. He was grunting and straining angrily, as though carrying something heavy over his shoulder. She heard the heavy thud of him throwing down the object on the worktop, and then the clink and clatter of all the appliances that she had just looked through. Through the gap in the wooden door, she could see the man was tall and burly, round with mass and muscle. He wore a checked coat, large hiking boots, and black rubber gloves, along with large glasses that concealed most of his face. He began to bare his teeth at the deer carcass that he had laid down on the worktop, showing a yellow and decaying row of teeth that all seemed to be the same size and yet still looked too big for his mouth. She could hear the electric whiz of a power tool and the crinkle of plastic sheeting when she just about realized, through the small crack of her small doorway, that the creature he was holding was indeed not a deer carcass. In fact, it was not a creature at all. Instead, what lay before the man was a girl, a human girl. Seemingly, she was unconscious, but breathing by the looks of her chest rising and falling softly. She had dark hair and looked about the same height and weight as Raven. Raven sat there, bunched up in her small hiding place uncomfortably, trying with every might of her being not to move or make a sound of any kind. She sat there with her hand over her mouth, trying to mask the fear-filled sound of her uneven and heavy breathing, trying desperately, with utter urgency, not to make a sound. Not to let her fear-filled screams of horror that she so desperately wanted to release let seep through the cracks. Her breathing increased, and she felt as though she was going to vomit with the sheer panic of it all, hoping and praying that he wouldn't see her through the crack of the door or hear her shallow, strained breaths. She sat and endured the sound of power tools spraying blood and cracking bones as the man worked away on his victim, hearing his rugged, heaving breathing and the occasional soft sigh of satisfaction and relief from him, all the while hoping and praying and wishing and pleading that she would not be next, that she would not be found. And then she realized it would make no difference how much she prayed or kept quiet or hoped or wished for a different fate. Her boots were caked with mud.